The sun is the only remedy for dark clouds in the sky. Similarly, there is no other medicine than aspiration for our troubled hearts. Aspiration is the first rung of the sky-kissing ladder. Realization is the last. True human aspiration has three intimate friends: purification, quietude, and intensity. Aspiration has an enemy called impatience. Aspiration is the mounting flame of our divine wish to raise ourselves to the crest and crowning of divine perfection. The body aspires through action. The vital aspires through struggles. The mind aspires through self-search. The heart aspires through the feeling of union. The soul aspires to the perfection of God's manifestation. Reema Datta, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you. That was beautiful.
Yeah, that was from, that was not mine. That was Sri Chinmoy, the great teacher. And, Reema, I really wanted to know when you realized that, maybe you didn't realize it like cognitively, but being able to look back on it, you realized that your purpose on this life was to heal people.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's actually, with everything happening in Afghanistan right now, it takes me back to 9/11. And that's when things really shifted for me. I was actually working at the United Nations, living in New York City. And after 9/11, I just, everything changed for me. I started to think about how I grew up with the practices of yoga and the capacity that yoga has to heal. And I was pretty disillusioned with, the work at the UN and with my studies in international affairs. And I realized, I also thought back to some time I spent in India where I was researching women's participation in village governments. And there was a law that had been passed that gave women 33% of village government seats. And in my research, what I found, the women I spoke with, a lot of them were giving their seats away to their husbands or their sons or their fathers. And I realized that, change really has to begin within, with how do we perceive ourselves and what do we see as our roles and our potential. And I just, it really drew me back to yoga and just doing deep work within ourselves and then letting that change ripple outwards. So that event of 9/11 really changed my life and the path of my life.
I can see in your eyes that you are a healer, and I just wanted to know if you could talk about when you were younger, before you were a professional, and, obviously that was a very traumatic event. I was in Long Island, actually, at that time, sleeping in my bed in my home that I grew up in. It was a long time ago, but when you were a child, when did you recognize that your superpower was as a healer?
Well, I can say as a child, I was always drawn to spirituality, and I was lucky to be born into a family of yogis. Growing up, I was surrounded by many of the elements of yoga. My mom, her favorite pastime is singing mantra.
Oh, wow.
So mantra is yogic songs. I've literally been hearing her sing mantra since I was in her womb, And then growing up, she was singing all the time, like while cooking, cleaning, driving us here and there. It was just a constant in our lives. And so I grew up with that, and then the rituals and prayers. My mom and grandmothers every day, or even twice a day, did these prayers and rituals, and I was always there, witnessing that and eventually partaking in that, and I was always drawn to it. And even my grandfather, he had a passion for yoga philosophy. So, he had his own career. He actually also worked for the United Nations. But in his personal life, he was very fascinated by yoga philosophy and had actually spent time writing books on the Vedas, Vedastic philosophy, and he gave talks. I listened to him give talks on the Vedas while I was growing up, and so he was kind of my introduction to the philosophy. And the Vedas are so complex and intricate, but he had this way of explaining things to me in very simple ways that I could understand even as a child. So I was drawn to these things, and luckily I was surrounded by them too. And so I feel really fortunate that, I grew up with all of these aspects of yoga. And I never, actually, to be honest, I never saw myself as becoming a healer or even, a yoga instructor or going into these things in my adult life, because in my family, yoga is part of our internal lives. It's like brushing our teeth or, just doing prayers. It's not something we make a career or, out of. So I didn't actually ever see myself in that way. But
it's more like the idea of looking. I mean, you are very passionate about your daughter as a teacher. My daughters are my teachers. So when you were a child, when did you access? I'm looking for a specific example of when you. Again, it wasn't a career path. There was no expectation. It was just that you accessed your multidimensional self. An experience that you cannot explain how it happened, but it happened.
Yeah. Gosh, it's hard to.
We just don't deal. I don't deal in platitudes. It has to be. I mean, what gives you what? It may be in only in hindsight you can look back and say that was something that was magical. But maybe it hadn't yet crystallized. You obviously 9/11. You became disillusioned for a variety of reasons. But I'm trying to go back in the lineage and talk about. I mean, it could not be. It could be a bad thing. It could be a traumatic thing. Just something where you recognized that there was a lot more going on than just what was happening in this life or in this time.
Yeah. I think part of it is I was very close to my grandparents, and I think after my grandmother passed, my meditation changed. They became really multidimensional, and I felt a really strong connection with her after she passed, even stronger than we had when she was alive.
Really?
And
wow.
Yeah, and so that really shifted things for me, and I felt like I connected with her and just the lineage of women in my family, and I, now I understand more. Like when I was a child, I was very empathic, and I still am, and just feeling, the struggles and pains of others. And I feel like when I was a child and now and in between, I always felt like that pain that women carry, from cultures like that I come from, because it's like, cultures and especially Indian culture is so beautiful. And in the same breath, cultures can be oppressive, and they are. And my grandmothers and the ancestral women in my lineage, they didn't have a lot of choices. They were told who to marry and when, and both of my grandmothers were married at 14 to men that they had never even seen or met, and they didn't have a choice, So it's, even though our culture is so beautiful and the spirituality that comes from India is so beautiful, there is this oppression, and I felt it a lot. And even though I grew up mostly in the U.S., and I have so many more choices than the women before me, I still have felt that pressure and control that comes with our culture. And after my grandmother passed, I just got ultra sensitive to that. And a lot of I think my draw to yoga, I had this, this, I had this wonder in my mind, because when I heard my grandfather talk about Vedic philosophy, it's all about living our potential and exploring our freedom. And I really felt this gap between the philosophy of yoga and the culture. And I felt like I want to bridge this gap. I want to bring this philosophy into our real lives and be able to overcome these cultural aspects that are oppressive, And so that has been a big part of my path, and in my own life, noticing when I get swayed by cultural or societal expectations, and then I have to consciously root myself back into my heart and who I am and what I want to create, even if that goes against cultural norms, You're
talking about cultural norms in the West?
The West and the East, really.
Can you give an example of something where you've had to, where you started to conform to some cultural dogma, but then fell back into your true nature?
Yeah, there's been a few, so I'm trying to.
Yeah, think, wherever go where your mind goes.
Yeah, I guess the most recent is just this is getting personal, but I can't help it. It's just, when I have a 9-year-old daughter, and I'm not with her father, and that's a big story in itself. But I've had the opportunity we separated when she was 3, and it was pretty traumatic for me. And I think part of that is because, growing up Indian, where I didn't grow up being exposed to separation and divorce and co-parenting and all of these things. So in one way, my mind was very resistant to that. And it was really hard for me when we first separated. And that was his decision to separate. And then 3 years later, around the time when my daughter was 6, he actually wanted to get back together. And I felt that I should, that, in our society, we celebrate families that are together in a unit. And at least in my culture, for sure, Indian culture. But it was hard for me to say no to him and to, by that time I got used to co-parenting and being a single mother. And I had to do a lot of just internal work to stick with my no and to continue co-parenting.
Why did you, what inside instinctually told you not to go back into a union? I was married to the mother of my children for 13 years, and there was a lot of simpatico and love in the beginning through through many years, but then after a while it was very evident that that we were taking different soul paths, and it's okay, we co-parent and it's much healthier for the girls, and but why did you, aside from getting used to co-parenting and did you feel like maybe that you were able to have more autonomy and freedom on your own than in a domesticated relationship based on cultural dogma?
Yeah, it was something maybe even more simple than that. It was just, I think because of being a yogini and being so connected to my body, my body said no. It wasn't even, of course I tried to work things out in my mind. But when I could just like step away from my mind,
Yeah.
it was very clear, like the message of my body was no. And I felt like I had this knowing that it wouldn't actually work. And of course my intellect was like, well, I could at least give it a try. But even that, I just felt like this knowing that it just wasn't a good idea. And
I really love that. I mean, can you talk to people? We are so in our heads now, and unless you are someone like yourself that cultivates the lineage of your yogic practices, what is the physical feeling like that you know that it's not the right thing?
I think like when there's a yes, it's just like such a feeling of settling in and like this calm clarity, and a no feels more just like restless and just just like a discomfort in the body.
It's beautiful. I mean, I guess, the bottom line is like, where are you at in terms of, I mean, I can tell that you are very, independent, and you have like a lot of, I wouldn't say, I think maybe the best way to put it is that, you take what you do as a practitioner of yoga, as a mother, you take what you do very seriously, but I don't see you taking yourself very seriously, which is beautiful, meaning that you've how have you learned to get out of the way of your ego, of your own way?
Part of that is prayers and practice. And I think, I see that you're a musician, and I think a lot of musicians and artists, we get that there's something larger than us that moves through us when we create what we create. And so, I've been exploring music since I was 10 years old, and at least musical instruments, and it's been a big part of my life. So even before I dove into yoga as deep as I have, so I have that background of just knowing and feeling that energy that's larger than myself. So when I teach or do most anything, I have that practice to surrender to that larger energy and just let it come through.
Well, first of all, I want to be very clear. I'm a journalist, and
Okay.
I'm not a musician. I play some percussion, but
Okay.
yeah, no. I just when did you first feel that information? I guess that's the idea is, when did you realize that you were a conduit for information coming through you, being able to accept the larger life force? Like, what instrument were you playing as a kid? When did you recognize that when you did get out of your own way and accept and surrender to this larger power, that you could be a vessel for information? I mean, that even though you may not have been aware of it at the time, looking back on it, you were immersed in this yogic culture, playing instruments, and so I'm just trying to get at the idea of like, like it's not like some switch went on at 20 something years old. This was in you from when you were still in the womb.
Yeah. I think growing up with all the prayers and ceremonies and rituals that we did had a big influence, because all of that is surrender and gratitude to that larger energy that gives us life and gives us everything. So that was just like a daily message in my life. And, ironically, one of the um, like the kind of moments that stands out in my life is actually when I was 10 years old, I started playing the piano,
Mm-hmm.
and I fell in love with Western classical music, like
Wow.
Beethoven and Chopin,
Mm-hmm.
and I had this wonderful teacher from Korea. I used to go to her once a week, and she really, for her, like a 10-year-old was actually old. Like she worked with kids since they were like 3, 4 years old. So she tried to like catch me up to playing, pretty complex music at a young age. And but I went with it, and it was great. And I just remember even like she kind of pushed me to play in competitions, and I did. And I don't know, when I played that music, I felt like I was connecting to, these Beethoven and Chopin.
Yeah,
Who
no,
are long
absolutely,
gone.
absolutely. You
You
were
know,
collecting to the intergalactic source. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And when I played and performed, of course I was nervous at first, but the nervousness so quickly went away, and
Mm.
I just felt connected to this larger energy. And music does that for me. Now I play several different instruments. I play the harmonium and sing and play the guitar and tabla, and I am and yeah, music just for me it's like there's so many aspects, so many practices within yoga. Mantra and music is one of them. But for me, it's almost like the most direct path to connecting to spirit. It just happens really fast for me.
Um, Tell me a little bit about your ability to. Uh, the harmonium is something used in kirtan quite a bit, and the classical. I'm curious about your ability to sort of throw the book away, and what is your improvisational leanings in music, and how much are you able to go beyond what you know how to play. I have a hard time with classical music because, it's
Mm-hmm.
just you're taking, well, in theory, if you were playing in a symphony or something like that, you're taking directives from a conductor as opposed to having a conversation with other people melodically and instrumentally. And, easy for me as a journalist and as a critic, I can, but I just wonder about if you feel like that's a place that
Mm-hmm.
you want to grow in musically is being able to sort of go into a free environment and improvise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And that's pretty much what I've been doing the past few years. Like when I sit at the harmonium and sing, I'm constantly creating new little songs.
Wow,
And
are you recording this stuff?
yeah, I have recorded 2 albums,
No,
and
no, I mean
I
are
was
you
very.
are you recording the instrumental riffs that you're doing the last few years?
Oh, I do now and then. I'll pick up my phone and just very casually record things that I'm like, oh, I want to remember this one.
Because that to me, when you go beyond what you know how to play and you're just free, that's when the intersection with spirit is most apparent. Not when you're being secure and reading or just playing along. It's just like that to me is an exhilarating feeling. I would love to hear, even though you might, you're just recording it on your phone. You're like, all right, this is just, never be ashamed of that stuff. That stuff should be out front and center.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually it's like my meditation often is just to sit with the harmonium and let myself really go
I love it. I
where it
love that's
goes.
so beautiful. That's the way that's the way. I mean, but that I mean, do you um to me I just wanted you to talk to people about the the idea of like the in monotheistic religion there's this sort of concept of God or where information is delivered from somebody who supposedly as a conduit for information from a God, when in fact we all have God within us, and what we've been talking about, sort of getting out of our own way and allowing information to come through us and being guides and vessels, like that's we are all have that ability. And I kind of just wanted you to talk about your concept of spirit or source, you know, and if it's a fluid thing, if it's something that and that is if it's something that is consistently changed now that you see your daughter as a teacher, your teacher.
Yeah, what I love about yoga is what I've learned is that everyone is a teacher, and
Mm-hmm.
when we are really just can let go of the ego and just sit empty and humble, we can see that everyone around us is a teacher, like our neighbors and our friends, like everyone. If we're listening, and receptive, then there's teachers all around us, And of course, I definitely see my daughter as my biggest teacher. But I've come to a place in my life where I see everyone as my teacher. And I feel like what I have to do is just be empty and receptive to what everyone around me is teaching, everything, the plants, the mountains, be receptive to all the wisdom out there. And it does, reflect and it helps me remember what is inside of me, and I think that is what a teacher does. We help people remember the wisdom that's always been inside. And those are the best teachers, who it's not any kind of ego trip. They're just fully there for us to help us remember what's inside. And I think Hinduism is very misunderstood. Like I've noticed in the West, like Buddhism is very embraced and understood, and there's a lot of misconceptions around Hinduism. And I think I feel like maybe people get a little turned off by Hinduism because we do have so many gods and goddesses. So I just like to say that, it maybe is not what it appears, because all of those gods and goddesses actually represent aspects of ourselves. And so in our culture, when we sing or we bow to a deity, we're awakening the deity within ourselves. We're not singing or bowing to anything separate from us. So all of those deities, all of those images are reminding us of what's inside of us. And that's why we place them in front of us and around us to help us remember. And we have so many aspects of ourselves. So, they represent beautiful things like courage and strength and the ability to destroy what doesn't serve us, the ability to create what does. So it's like, what do I need today? Do I need to let go of something today? Well, then maybe I'll sing or meditate on Kali or Durga, because they represent that destructive energy. Or is there an obstacle in my life today that I need help to remove? Then maybe I'll sing to Ganesh or meditate on Ganesh, not because I'm waiting for something outside of myself to help me, but so I can awaken that Kali within me or that Ganesh within me.
I love that. That's so perfect. I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not sure if it's misunderstanding, or just sort of like confusion, because it's what you said at the beginning, because, Hinduism is the largest religion in India. And you guys, your family came up as yogis, and, like you said, there's so much restrictive cultural, bias, whatever the word is, as it relates to women in India. And yet, so while there's all this beauty, and people going towards this state of stillness and peace and sovereignty and a dedication, there's also a lot of there's not equal rights There's not equal playing field amongst the genders. So I think it's not even about the religion itself. It's that how can people misinterpret or interpret their their beliefs in such very different ways. I mean, again, it's common in this country too, but it's like, there's this, why did you leave India? Or I mean, why did you want to live here? It's because you wanted to and make the decisions that you did. You wanted to have sovereignty because the majority of women that are Indian, they don't, and it's just, to me, like, that's because I find it to be a very mystical. It's the most mystical place, It's the whole, all the traditions are mystical. The food, the culture, the music, the all the stuff. It goes so far deep, and so many Western cats gravitate to it. But yet, within that, within the culture, there's all this repression. I mean, do you feel like that's where some of the confusion might stem from?
Well, there's a lot in there. First, I was going to say that, India is an enormous country. And so it's, like anything we say about India, if we say the opposite, it's also true.
That's what I'm saying. Where can we find, is there in it, and are you at peace to say that we can find some middle ground, or is that just absolutely unattainable?
Yeah, I think as first just recognizing that there's so much diversity within India. So on one hand, there are actually a lot of women who are free and, very educated and marrying who they want to marry. And things are actually changing quickly in India in that realm. But India is so huge. So the reality for women in cities is different from the reality of women in villages. And there's so many villages and cities. So there's not one truth in India. There's a lot.
Absolutely.
Of different realities happening. So that's, one thing. And, I have noticed, like, when you're a Westerner, like for Westerners who are drawn to yoga and Indian culture, it's so different because you can pick and choose what you want, whereas when you're in the culture, you're just in it, and it's a different experience, with the aspects of the different aspects of the culture. But on another level,
yeah,
like Hinduism came 3,000 years after the yoga scriptures were written. Like the first yoga scriptures, the Vedas, they were written 3,000 years before religion, but they predate religion. So in its pure form, yoga is beyond culture and society, and those overlays of religion and culture came actually thousands of years after the practices were written down, and it was an oral tradition before that. So the actual yoga philosophy and practices are very liberating. They're actually telling us to not live by any external authority, but to be able to look inwards and maintain a focus inwards so that we're never living outside of our integrity. So
how would your grandfather talk to you about what the Vedic scriptures said about this very topic? Because going back to the beginning of the conversation, you talked about one of your goals, especially it keeps rearing its head even now with the crisis in Afghanistan, is just the way women are viewed. I don't want to say as subhuman, but they are clearly limited in their equal rights. And I just wonder, the Vedic scriptures, being that they were, or being that the yogic scriptures were written so much, or it was an oral tradition before Hinduism was written. I just wonder if what your grandfather would say to you as it related to us all being one, because I think more conservative Hinduism or that kind of stuff can lead towards, the caste system that you're talking about, which is maybe more wealthy women have more power to decide who they want to marry if they live in a city, more cosmopolitan. But I just don't know where, I'm not an expert in Hinduism, but somewhere along the line, someone got the impression that women don't have rights or less rights than men.
Yeah, I think it's gone back and forth in history. Like maybe when the Vedas were first written, women may very well have had more rights. And then, I don't think it's been like one straight road.
Sure.
But my grandfather was actually very against the caste system, and he actually refused to even use his last name because your last name tells you what caste you are. So he rebelled in that way, against the caste system. And he was actually a freedom fighter alongside Gandhi during India's fight for independence. And he saw so much violence, in his life, between the Indians and the British, and then between the Muslims and the Hindus. And at the same time, he had this very, strong yoga practice. So it is a really interesting question. And actually, the last time I saw him was 2015. And he since passed on. But, I kind of knew that was going to be the last time I was going to see him. And he lived in this tribal village in central India. And he had decided to dedicate the last portion of his life fully to service, to seva. And he built a community center in this village and did a lot of work for the villagers, with literacy and training and participating in the village governments and yoga and just farming techniques, just all sorts of trainings and assistance to the villagers. And so he had so much experience. And so when I saw him last, I called him Bapuji. And I said, Bapuji, if you have so much wisdom, if you just have if there was just one thing that you could pass on to my kids and the next generation, like what would that be? And he said, forget these labels of Indian, American, Pakistani, Hindu, Muslim, Christian, and relate to each other as humans.
I love this. That man is a genius. Yeah. One human race, baby. I love it.
Yeah, he said universal brotherhood and sisterhood are the foundations of love. And that was it. And that's what he stood for. And because he just saw so much divisiveness, in his life. And we're seeing it, sadly, we're seeing it right now in our country. And
it's all based on labels. It's all based on labels.
It's all based on labels. And that's what, yoga teaches us, is to get out of those labels. And that any label is really limiting, and it creates division between ourselves and others. And it's actually the antithesis of yoga, which is unity, and it's so, I was actually thinking about this earlier today, and I would just, given what's happening in our country today, I would add to what my grandfather said and say, forget these labels of BIPOC and white and heterosexual and homosexual and conservative and liberal and vaccinated and unvaccinated, because all of those, when we get attached to those labels, we're creating division, and that's the antithesis of yoga. And we start to see others as separate from ourselves and not as a part of ourselves. And we're these days, we don't even take the time and energy to listen to people who have different perspectives. And we're just so quick to attack and fight and cancel. And it's like we're not in that vibration of love and spirit and yoga. And it's so sad to see. And even, talking about it, yoga is connected to Ayurveda. And Ayurveda is the larger science. Mm-hmm. And in Ayurveda, it's very clear they have these three states of being called sattva, rajas, and tamas. And when we're in a sattvic state, we're so like rooted in oneness, and we know that even if we have different backgrounds and histories and religions and genders, that at our very essence, we are the same. Like we all want happiness and peace and security and stability, and we all want freedom from pain and suffering. So at these very basic levels, we are the same. And when we get into these more imbalanced states, like tamas is a more lazy state where, you know, if we have different perspectives, we don't even take the time to listen to other people. Or rajas is a more heated state that we just get very quick to judge and label and get angry and create division. And I feel like as a humanity or as a country right now, we're in very, or I guess as a world, we're in very rajasic and tamasic states where we're just so quick to fight and cancel and attack each other. And, you know, to be in a sattvic state doesn't mean we have to agree with each other. It doesn't mean we have to have the same perspective. It just means that we have this feeling of love and oneness and understanding, and we can sit side by side and talk about our different views, talk about our different perspectives, you know. And I feel like we have lost that. Like we have come out of that center of love and spirit. And I pray that we can come back to that center, you know.
Well, I mean, Reema, that was some of the most beautiful poetry I've ever heard in my life. You know, but I want to ask you because there's a lot in there, and it's all true. How the yoga community is can be very passive aggressive. There can be a lot of acrimony within even this. You know, there's
I agree.
There's faux teachers. There's people that will look at Reema and say, "How come she is so much jealousy?" They'll try to take you down. And I guess maybe within the yoga community, how maybe you can talk about how you've, in your own way, tried to break down what your grandfather talked about in that final, you know, empirical message of oneness, one human race, and how you've tried to rise above it, especially when people are nipping at your heels and trying to bring you down to that level, which, as I tell my older daughter, is only because those people are feeling insecure and trying to bring you down to their level. How have you learned to rise above it?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I totally agree. It's strange how divisive and cruel the yoga world is
crazy
in itself. It's really shocking. But yeah, I mean, I've learned to protect my energy. You know, like I go to different studios and I teach what I teach, and for the most part, I meet wonderful people and get beautiful feedback, and then there's always, you know, strange things happen as well. And I just learned that it's more about what I'm giving than anything else. So it's like I have a satisfaction to go to a group of people and give what I give. And of course, I'm always like wide open to feedback, and I'm very clear about that. And I love when people take the time to offer me feedback. But I also, you know, when I come up with weird stuff like competition and just some kind of like meanness, I just learned to, you know, find satisfaction in what I'm giving, and recognize that, you know, if people are feeling insecure or whatever, it's more about things that they have to work through within themselves. And just, I give myself permission to not get too involved and wrapped up, you know.
You know, my question is this, because you were so articulate before, and you don't even have to have an answer to this stuff, but it's like, you talk about people like people won't even listen to, you know, it's just, there's rage and anger, and that has, some of that has to do with what I talk about which is, competition, because their religion is best. What they grew up with, they know, they believe it's superior. So therefore, how could you possibly come at this whole thing and say, we all have the same needs, we all are basically believing in the same? They don't like that. Okay, they don't want that. They don't want that. They believe what they have been taught is superior. And so therefore, there is no debate. And you're coming onto this land with whatever these, it's gotten so perverted. So what I'm hearing you say, though, is that in your own, because all you can do, and I know you do this because your aura is very strong, is that, you can only affect change, positive change in your world. My hope is that this interview will go out, and even if one person hears it and it maybe stops them from doing something drastic or makes them feel inspired to do something, then we've done our job. But when you encounter people, and I'm actually asking you to talk to other teachers, because I just feel like there's not, the question really is, when you come up against that competition, that envy, that irrational jealousy, you preserve your spiritual energy. Do you believe that those people are salvageable through your own? Can you affect hearts and minds from people that are coming at this from a competitive place, or do you just let it alone?
Yeah, I do my best. I give my best, and then I kind of surrender. And one of my teachers, I heard him say once that, we don't have control over other people's thoughts and actions. The only thing we can control is our own behavior and our own thoughts and our own words. And of course, we try to, when we see pain, we do our best to, alleviate it and give our best wisdom and whatever we have to give. But at the end of the day, it's we can't change that other person. Only they can do that themselves. If they can be receptive and do the work within themselves to change, or not. So it's again, just having that satisfaction of giving my best, and then just letting myself step back, and not trying
to waste energy trying to, I don't know, maybe just convincing people through action is probably all I can say is that, for me, when I first started my program, people were after I started my show and I was doing a lot of socio-political things related to immigration. I live in Tucson. So, but after 3 or 4 months, I was like, everybody else is doing this. I don't want to do this. So I somehow had this revelation about reaching inside my records and pulling out all these amazing musicians to start doing long form interviews. And after the few months, everyone's like, "Oh yeah, he's a jazz journalist," and I'm like, "No, I'm like, no. I love, it's all music. That's what the Duke Ellington line is. It's all music, and then the subjective part is either it's good or bad." So I did not want to be labeled. So I went after folk musicians and world musicians and bluegrass musicians. And now it's, after 10 years, 2,000 interviews and 4 books, it's all music. So, I have been, so, in my own yogic way, even though I'm not nearly as disciplined as others, it's just, I have tried to, I'm absolutely in line with your grandfather's philosophy of, in the sense of music, because labels in music have stratified music. They've hurt the ability of music to grow, because you're constantly, oh, that's jazz and that's R&B, when before, 50 years ago, you could go into a store and get a Blackwood Brothers album, and behind that would be a Gary Bartz album, and you're going from basically, white country gospel to African jazz. So it's like, there was those barriers come up in society all over the place, and people are so afraid to let go of their identities based on labels, because then they feel they have no identity. That's kind of the key, the ability to surrender to that. But, we have a game on this program, Reema, called Name That Voice. And
okay.
I just take a listen to this, pay attention to the content, and we'll come back.
Okay.
Here's the perfect example of the way Maharaji taught, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So finally, through a series of seemingly random events, Ram Dass finds himself sitting in front of Maharaji. And Maharaji looks at him and says, you have some medicine? So Ram Dass thought maybe he has a headache. So he took out some aspirin. And Maharaji said, nay, not that. The yogi medicine. So Ram Dass thinks, yogi medicine? He must mean acid. So he takes out some pills, some acid, puts it on his offers it to Maharaji on his hand. Maharaji takes all 4 pills. Each one was enough to put a horse on the moon. And he takes all 4 of them and throws them in his mouth. And Ram Dass and he sat around together all day. And there was no change in Maharaji's behavior at all. None.
Wow.
And Ram Dass recognized that whatever LSD is, this being was beyond it. And that was a life-changing experience for him. Mm-hmm. So that's the way Maharaji did things, okay? So let me just finish this story. So the next day he comes. No, this actually happened the day before. So he arrived there from the plains. He and this other guy drove from Nepal through the plains of India and got back up into the mountains where Maharaji was. And the night before, they had stayed at this person's house some long distance away on the plains. And in the middle of the night, Ram Dass got up to go take a piss. And he walks out of the house and on his way to the outhouse. And he looks up at the stars, and the sky's all sparkling and beautiful. And he was thinking about his mother, who died 6 months before. And he felt very close to her for the first time since she died. And then he goes in peace and goes back to sleep. Next morning, they get into the car and they drive all day, many hours. And in the late afternoon, they find themselves with Maharaji up in the hills, because this other guy knew where Maharaji was. It was his guru. So Ram Dass is sitting there, and Maharaji looks at him and said, you were out under the stars last night? Ram Dass goes, yeah. And Maharaji said, you were thinking about your mother? Yeah. She died? Yeah. She got very big here, and he puts his hand over where the spleen is. That's because she died of cancer of the spleen, right? She got very big here before she died. Yeah. And Maharaji looks at Ram Dass, and in English, he says, spleen. And at that moment, Ram Dass fell apart. And he wept like a baby. And his whole life changed at that moment.
Reema Ma, you know who that is?
The Neem Curly Baba?
No, do you know who was speaking? Do you know who was telling that story?
Oh, no, I don't know who's speaking.
That was my first interview with Krishna Das, who is, I know someone that you have collaborated with. And so, he was talking about Ram Dass going to see Neem Curly Baba. I don't know if you know that story, those stories or not, but basically, what I feel, I've been asking Reema Ma to do an interview for a long time, and now we finally get a chance to do it. And because I feel like you are in that lineage, the psychic lineage and the cosmic consciousness. And, I wanted you to talk about, the kind of, the way that you see, how you have seen people, like the idea that Maharaji could look at Ram Dass and say spleen in English. I mean, that is profound. And that's kind of what I was getting at before. And I wonder, in your own way, in this time, if you can talk about your ability to be, I don't know if psychic is the right word, but to be able to, when you connect deeply with somebody, how you can feel them and read them as an empath, and how that gives you a lot of credibility without you having to brag or toot your own horn or anything like that, where it's just you being you. I've felt like that since the minute I saw you.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, what you're asking has kind of become my work, in the world.
I know.
A few years ago, when I went through my most traumatic time, was actually during the time of the separation I had mentioned, and my mind was overcome with like anger and anxiety and attachment, and I started to become ultra sensitive to other people experiencing these kinds of emotions and states of mind. And I actually started to see it everywhere, even amongst, high-level yogis, just this kind of mental suffering. And at that time, I actually went back to the yoga scriptures and read them with a fresh set of eyes, like the eyes of a mother and a woman, and things started to shift for me a lot. It's like in Sanskrit there's a word called klesha, and it means a mind.
How do you spell it? How do you spell it?
Klesha. Wow. And klesha means a mind poison or a destructive emotion. And the ancient yogis identified the main kleshas as attachment, anger, isolation, jealousy, and fear. And as I looked at this body of work, I started to add anxiety, depression, and shame to the list because of it's so prevalent in our world today. Those emotions as well.
Absolutely.
Right. And so I actually started to change the way I practice and teach yoga. And I came up with yoga sequences where we actually learn to face our kleshas and move through them. And because as a humanity, I feel like, it's hard to face our pain, and it's easier to brush it under the carpet or pretend it doesn't exist, or, just turn away from it. But when I went back to the yoga scriptures, and as I was going through my own process, I realized that healing actually comes from facing our kleshas and really learning to be with them and hold them with tenderness and compassion, and, make friends with our kleshas. And that's when we really start to heal. And instead of those kleshas holding us down, we start to become more free of them, and we start to grow. And so, this is what this is all I do now. I call it yoga for emotional healing, and yatri. And this is all I do now, is I teach people how to face these kleshas and to really, make friends with them and move through them so they don't have such a big hold on us, and we can be lighter and freer from that. And it's not easy, it's not like doing a feel-good yoga practice and having peace for 20 minutes afterwards. It's like really, really deep work. Yeah. And the reason I did it, because I myself was feeling restless. I'm like, I've been doing yoga and studying for so many years, but I felt like I didn't experience that complete freedom and that lasting peace that the yogis really talk about. And I realized it's because, I haven't taken the time to be with my pain, to really dig to the roots of my kleshas. And I, maybe being empathic, or, I realized that so many people around me can value from this kind of work. And it's affected my life and my offerings. And because, in yoga, it's as you can imagine, it's much more of a subtle body practice, an energetic practice. And, what happens as we move through life, if we push away our pain and don't really face what's in front of us, and we do that for months and years and decades, then these knots start to form in our mind and our body.
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
And Sanskrit, those knots are called granthis. And it just, the word just sounds awful, right? Like granthis.
No, I like it though.
In
Yeah,
our
it's all
mind.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, originally the reason we practice yoga is to loosen those granthis so that the prana can flow fully and freely, and we can connect to spirit and all these other realms. But when our mind and body is full of granthis, it's like we get stuck and we get sick. And the ancient yogis actually said that kleshas, they not only drain our energy, but they're the root cause of disease, both mental and physical. And of course now, like, Western scientists are acknowledging the role of thoughts in our health and our illness. But this is stuff that the yogis knew, thousands of years ago. So, in my work, this is what I'm doing when I connect, either when I'm working with someone individually or as a group. I'm really, supporting people to look at their pain and to heal deep things within themselves, so we can really loosen those knots and experience freedom.
Reema Ma, can we, we've gone for an hour here. Can we do set 2? Because I barely got to anything I really wanted to talk to you about. It was a wonderful transmission.
Mm-hmm. Do you mean now or not?
No. I mean, in the near term, in the next couple of weeks.
Oh, okay. Sure, absolutely.
Just wanted to finish this segment, and by asking you, because you give so much. The danger for a lot of people, especially in a yogic field or being an empath, is that you give and give and give, and then I've seen it with a lot of musicians too, and they never really learn how to receive, and then they get into a dark place, and then maybe they do something drastic. And I just wonder how you remain open to receiving love, because you give so much of yourself.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, that's honestly something I'm learning to do. And yeah, I feel like I've been fortunate in my life. I grew up with very loving parents and family around me, and then some of my 20s and 30s were challenging, and some trauma here and there. And I feel like something within me has been kind of shifting and settling the last 2 years or so, where I'm actually learning to receive love. Like, I'm being receptive to the love that the universe is bringing to me, and I'm letting myself receive it, which has honestly been a practice. Like, I got more used to giving, and I forgot how it even feels to receive. And the universe has given me gifts, like, the last 2 years, through people and just location where I am. And it's been like a conscious practice to let myself receive.
I just want to say that, like, when you have a traumatic experience, separation, divorce, you've been hurt, whatever. I mean, it's hard to trust and be vulnerable again. But I can tell that your life force, if you continue to allow yourself to be vulnerable, to receive love, then your life force will continue to grow. Your inspiration for people will continue to grow. Your purpose in life will continue to grow. And you're a very important person in the world, Reema, and I don't ever want you to forget that. And I want you to continue to stay on your path and continue to be vulnerable, because it's cats like yourself who are going to affect positive change in your world, and help people look towards the light, going back to the original Vedic text that your grandfather used to explain to you in such simple terms. I mean, the definition of genius is making something complex something simple. So he obviously had that, and you have that too. And so anyway, I thoroughly enjoyed your knowledge and honesty and point of view, and I look forward to creating with you again.
Well, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. I really appreciate this opportunity to share and to connect with you and your listeners.
Thank you, my friend. I'll be in touch, and many blessings to you and your daughter, and just continue to cultivate your true nature. You're a very important person.
Thank you so much.
Bless you, friend.
You too. Many thanks.
Okay, bye.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Bye-bye.
Bye. That's it for the Jake Feinberg Show. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you later.